We are back with Richard Singh. Richard, how did you get involved with the current suicide epidemic in Guyana?
I lost a few friends to suicide, and over the years in Guyana, I've met and made good friends with suicide survivors. And through my studies and also HIV counseling testing, I met a lot of people who actually were contemplating suicide and talking about suicide. And it was difficult for me to actually sit there and know that there's not a lot of services. And the little that I could do, I actually did. So when last year came, was doing my studies, and I lost one of my good friends, and that really changed.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. It really changed my mindset because I knew he was depressed, but there's nothing I could actually did for him from here. And I said to myself, you know what, this is it. I've been silent too long. I've doubted myself, and I cannot do this anymore. I have to do something. So I reached out to a few of the diaspora community and a few friends back home, and we started to talk, and I did a research paper on suicide, and it really helped me to understand the concept, what's happening, and I dig deeper into understand the history of suicide within Guyana. So yeah.
Let me just go to the chat room and read a couple of comments. Cliff said, nice, good luck. Colin, friend of Richard, great person to be around. Cliff, great journey. Rasta Barbie, oh, I'm so happy I tuned in. Selwyn and Richie, great conversation.
Show me life, what life good.
Blessings. James and SRP, sending the love. Looking good, Richard. Nice hearing your story. Cliff, so glad you're sticking to your true value to help the lesser people out and to make a change in Guyana. You earned a master's degree in social work from Columbia.
Yeah.
What was your focus?
I'm just getting a little emotional here, so excuse me.
Take your time.
You asked me a question earlier, and I didn't answer it totally. So here's the full answer along with this. My whole goal and my whole aim for my master's was to basically understand social work from a developing world perspective. I don't like to use the term third world. So what I did, I actually planned what my education would look like and what I want from the experience, because I knew in the end of this I want to go back into my communities that I've done work in Guyana. So what I did was actually looked at the program at Columbia University to see if they can support what I wanted, and they did. So I did every single thing from working with NGOs, from program management, implementation, project management. I literally tailored my education to fit Guyana. So I actually came with some experience from Guyana. I knew exactly what was happening within the country. And here's the thing. I respect social workers within Guyana. They do a very good job. They're overworked, I get it. But when I looked at it, there's not a lot of social workers in the field of social enterprise and administration, excuse me. That field is specifically designed for social workers who manage projects, who are managers. And when I looked at it, there's not a lot of professionals back home in Guyana in that area. So I said to myself, I can do clinical, but no, I want to do what I want to do is SEA, Social Enterprise and Administration. This is going to give me the opportunity in the upper edge to actually go back within Guyana to do work and help on a macro level, with all due respect to the clinicians on the micro level and the meso, right? The systems, the three systems that we as social workers come to know and grow and to love. But when it comes to the bigger system, in terms of the macro, there's not a lot of social workers, I think, back home. And that's one of the reasons why I tailored my education based on what I've experienced in Guyana. And that's why when you ask me a question, right, what motivates me or what drives me, right, my passion right now in life to do social work, that is it right there.
Should you get all your experience your qualifications and you return to Guyana, what area, which ministry, or who would you be able to utilize your experience and skills?
Policy, project management, implementation, and evaluation. Any project that is dealing with from all the social issues. You talk about suicide, you talk about HIV/AIDS, you talk about domestic violence, you talk about rights of the child, alcohol and substance abuse. Now, I just want to make one thing clear. I'm not an expert clinician per se, but a lot of my skills and expertise lie in the area of developing projects, looking at implementation, and also evaluating those projects. Why are projects not working in Guyana? That's one of the questions we should be asking ourselves. Are those projects being evaluated? How often are they evaluated? What are the outcomes? These are some of the tough questions we should be asking. And these are the experience that I bring to the table among the other experience that I have. So, you name a project that needs to be implemented, I am the person. You tell me what you want, I will sit with every stakeholder, create a project, work it out through research, find ways of implementing it, but you have to listen to those who have the skills. And that's the thing what I'm trying to say. You have mental, there's the, people tend to go with the mental capacity, the mental way of thinking, but you need to go into the research, look at the research, see if within your country what's going on, look at other countries, what they've done before. Don't sit and say, you know what, we're going to do this because we think we should do this. No, you have to look at the data. That's the type of person I am. Those are some of the skills.
You did a paper on the issue of suicide epidemic in Guyana.
Yes.
And the government's reaction.
Yeah.
Would you tell us what led you to choose this particular topic?
Okay. So one of the areas that I did my study at Columbia University is immigrants and refugees. And I focused more, a part of my study also in international social welfare policy, because I knew Guyana, when it comes to policies, they need a lot of policies. They need a lot of changes within the policies. So what happened, as I mentioned, when my friend passed away, I decided to focus a little bit much more on this. This became one of my personal things that I wanted to do because it affected me on that level whereby I needed to understand it a little bit much more. So I delved into the information, delved into the research, but there was not a lot of information in the World Wide Web. When I looked into Guyana trying to access a lot of information, some of it was pretty much outdated. So when I started to look at suicide, there was a lot of trends, there was a lot of data was basically popping up, and there was a lot of questions. So for me, I looked at it from a policy standpoint, right? That is just one of many areas that you can look at suicide in Guyana, but I tried to focus on policy because when I looked at it, there wasn't at that time any policy. If there was any policy, well, it wasn't visible in the internet, on the internet, sorry. So I try to attack my paper from a policy perspective because I think one of the things is that having the stakeholders coming forward and talking, you have to start at a policy level. That's just one of many. But what I'm trying to say is this. At that point in time last year, looking at the context of the situation, how are we going to have changes? What are we going to do? I thought at that point in time, looking at it from a policy perspective would be one of the best approach. And within that paper, I presented a couple of recommendations. So it wasn't only policy, but also recommendations for policies. So yeah.
What are some things you learned during your research that many would be surprised to know about the epidemic and the government's reaction to it?
One of the things that I learned is this. I cannot remember the author name for the paper, but from his research, he's actually Guyanese, and what he did was actually focus a little bit on the history of Guyana. And what I've learned from that is that he said countries that experience the post-colonial era, such as Guyana and many others, they tend to have a lot of social issues, and suicide is one of those issues that basically comes out of that colonial era. And that was very surprising for me. That really took me like way off, like surprised, really, really surprised. I try to actually find more data on that in the internet, but I figure there's not a lot of people who are interested in understanding the history of suicide from a colonial era. That is one. And two, one of the other things that really, really surprised me about Guyana is this. It's only 83,000 square miles, just as big as England. Population, not even a full 800,000. 60% of the population probably live on the coastal plain. You have a government or an administration that can reach majority of your population. Where is suicide happening? Let's break it down, not geographically in terms of regions, but break it down in terms of the coastal plain, interior, and so forth. Right? And you're telling me, from my research, you're telling me that you cannot actually reach out to your population. One simple thing. What I discovered is that they don't even have, at that point in time when I did my research, a policy on hotline. Right? There's no hotline policy. People can call, get help, nothing, no policy at all. And the WHO, I was looking at WHO to see if they actually have any information based in Guyana. That really took me by surprise. Knowing the fact that the history of suicide in Guyana has been there for a very long time, and that data is basically going up and up and up and in ranking.
Pardon me, if you were to make a recommendation
Yes.
for such a hotline,
Yeah.
who would you have to contact for that?
One of the things that I gather from my research, and this is just my personal recommendation also, the Minister of Social Services would definitely be your first person to contact with that. Now, I'm not sure. From the Facebook, I know there are a few of my friends and a few of the diaspora community who actually put out a lot of information on hotlines after the death of Zenita. And that actually triggered, I think, this whole conversation about suicide in Guyana, bringing it more from the dark. So I think, and I say I think because I'm not in Guyana right now, right? The social services would definitely be the person who you would have to contact.
Based on your research and experience in Guyana on this matter, are there any easy fixes, or is this problem beyond fixing?
There's no easy fix to this conversation. And the reason being is that, let me put this in a quick nutshell. Picture a bicycle.
Mhm.
Picture the spokes of the bicycle. The spokes of the bicycle, that are the different facets, if you want to say, to life in terms of poverty, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of race. You talk about education. You talk about every single thing. Each one of those spokes represents something about life and society. Now, when you have that little hub where all the spokes actually reach, where the hub is that spins, now that is the individual. That is what we call like the micro level, right? The spokes that connect the hub to the outer wheel, the framing, that's the meso, that's the groups, that's like the faith-based organizations, the NGOs. The outer part where the tubing is, right? That is basically government. That is the society, that's the macro level, right? Now, for this conversation to be moved, if you want to say roll smoothly, all three of those need to be in sync. If they're not in sync, you're going to have a lot of problem. What happens when you got a broken spoke? Your wheel, it kind of like, it doesn't roll properly, right? And that's what's going to happen. So my point is this. For us to address this, you can't address this only from one angle. You have to address it from all the facets that basically affect individuals. And within Guyana, you have to understand, yes, Guyana is a particular culture. You have to understand within the Rupununi, right? Or in Mabarumo, or Skeldon, or right in Georgetown, there are subunits of culture. You have to do research. You have to understand your Guyanese population, understand your citizens, see what is affecting them, in what area. You can't say, look, I'm going to just basically come up with one tailored something and it's going to be like fitting all the different cross sections. No, it's not. Geographically, people are affected differently. For example, if you're living in, let's say, Region 9 area, there's something in terms of job opportunities may affect you more. That may contribute to your stress, lead to suicide. Let's say if you're in Georgetown, you have access to jobs much more easily. Probably not. I'm not sure. My point is, you cannot say what's going to work in Region 4 can work in all the rest of the regions. It doesn't work that way. You need to understand your population and see what's affecting within those communities, and then take that data, sit down with all the stakeholders, and tailor something that can basically work for the population.
One thing in your finding
Yes.
that really surprised you.
Oh, from my research?
Yes.
The lack of initiative.
What
The
is
lack
that?
of government initiative to address the issue of suicide. Now, let's back it
And
up.
let's just clear, when was this research done?
This research was done in 2015.
2015.
Yes.
That was
Around May 2015.
May 2015. That's post or that's
Pre.
pre-elections.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh.
that's pre-elections.
Yeah.
Pre-elections,
Mhm.
correct. Right. Right. So let's back this up a little bit, this conversation. Right. When you look at suicide, right, a lot of times, let me allude to one of your previous hosts that you had on here that mentioned pain, right? Is a pain that caused someone to basically drive them to suicide. And that's so true. I totally agree with that comment, because when you look at mental health situation, right, it is that person's stability, the mind frame and set, what that person is thinking, if they're depressed, if they're anxious, if they're experiencing any other form of mental illness, right? You have to take these things into consideration. So what I'm trying to say is this, right? We're not sure, but we have theories and ideas that yes, mental health, more likely or to some extent, there's a correlation between suicide and the mental health condition. Because if someone is depressed, more likely, if they're feeling that pain, they need that pain to ease. And one of the easiest things to do is probably just to end that pain through suicide. So for me, I don't understand why, at that point in time when I was doing my research, there was a lack of initiative from those officials who were responsible to charge that process, to actually attempt to solve some of the problems. I cannot say they will solve all, but at least attempt to start to look into things like job, recreational facilities, look at schools, try to put counselors in schools. A simple thing. One of the things from my research that I've learned is hospitals. Within the hospitals in Guyana, I'm not sure if they have them right now, but when you come into the ER, you need to have a social worker do an assessment, do a screening. If the doctor basically recognizes that there's some instability or there's recognizable that, you know what, there's some mental health going on here, right? That's the first place you can catch it. My whole point is you can catch it within the ER. You can catch it at schools. That's why it's important. And I love the conversation on Facebook that people are saying, look, let's start at the younger generation because this thing is bigger. They don't have the skills, the coping skills to deal with this. We need to help them before this basically become into a volcano. So I know I've all around there, I'm just
No, that's okay.
putting it out there, but in a nutshell, what I've learned is that there's not a lot of initiative, and that really hurt me.
Your work in Guyana, how would you say your work in Guyana prepared you for this next phase of your career, social work?
It really gave me the opportunity to look at what I've learned, if I should say, in the international scene. Because it gives me an opportunity to bring that skill and that information into the United States and within hopefully very soon to start to work as a social worker here. And I can do comparison, have parallels, and to see how things are being done in Guyana and seeing how things are being done here. I have this opportunity, I think, to look at what we can do back home more in terms of improving, right? So for me, that is one of the takeaways that I'm anxious and so eager to get my hands wet or my feet wet, just to bring that experience more, take it into an environment where I can just nurture myself, grow and develop more, and get more skills.
When you were there on the ground in Guyana, how many organizations you know of
Yeah.
that are dealing with or were dealing with suicide?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that question two ways. No, to my knowledge, there's not one organization specifically dealing with suicide in terms like if there was an organization, let's say, dealing with HIV and AIDS, specifically with that? No. However, there are a few organizations that actually give service or offer service to those persons who need suicide information. There's just a few, but it's not solely the service that they offer. So there's not a lot.
You know,
Not a lot.
it's interesting where this conversation is going and how organic it is, and it's important that the topic of suicide comes up because it is an epidemic in Guyana,
Yes.
and it's a very alarming thing to me. The idea of suicide and epidemic being juxtaposed, and it's from a country, as you said, with less than 800,000 people, and my country, of course, is very sad to me. But I have invited you. You know, I'm doing a 5-part series
Yes.
on suicide epidemic in Guyana on my Sunday afternoon program, and I want to go deeper because I want to ask you some questions as to what would it take for an organization to be formed that is specifically geared to suicide epidemic. You know, you sat there,
Yeah.
you sit there, and you speak so eloquently and knowledgeably about social work and you know from the macro level and policy making and so on. And as someone in the chat room said early on that the country will be Guyana will be better off to have people like you return. That is very important. But I want to drive the conversation further along. In what ways do you believe your experience as a pharmacist will help you to be a better social worker?
Two things. One, as a pharmacist, and I'm speaking as a pharmacist in the context of Guyana,
Mm-hmm.
there's something that we call counter prescribing. Counter prescribing is basically when someone comes into the pharmacy, right? They tell you what's happening to them, and you do a quick diagnosis, right? Now, you're able to help them through active listening. Social workers, we do the same thing. Active listening. The only way you're going to know the problem if you listen. So that's one. Two. Now, as a pharmacist, back home in Guyana, right? You're allowed to actually dispense medication without a prescription. Back then, I'm not sure now. I can get myself into problems, but it was called counter prescribing. However, there's limitations to that. Meaning, okay, someone got a headache, you give them Advil or ibuprofen or something like that. Anything that is beyond your scope or need testing done, X-rays and so forth, you do not, as a pharmacist, basically venture into that area. What you do is that you call referral, you help that person find a doctor or go to a specialist. Now, here's the second part that connects to the pharmacist. To social worker. We, as social workers, have the skills. We have the knowledge. That's the difference between the two and the similarities. I just took it a little step further,
Yes.
just to make that comparison, so you can understand what I'm trying to say. So, as a social worker, right, you also need to do referral. If you're not skilled in that area, that's not your specialization. So don't get me wrong, right? I'm just twisting that up a little bit so you can get like some of what a social worker can do can be similar just as a pharmacist and vice versa. But at the same time, both professions, you still have to do referral. And that's my point. If you're not skilled in a particular area with suicide policies, implementation and evaluation of suicidal programs, have the people who know it come into your country, reach out to your diaspora, or actually bring the programs to the University of Guyana, train individuals, have those individuals go back into your community. And if you may allow me to say this very quickly, when I was there, the government had a very nice program. It was the substitute for the medics program, a community health work, I think they call it, whereby they train those community health workers to do x-ray, dispensary, nursing, etc. Why, at that point in time, they did not look into having those community health workers train in some areas, or at least fully trained as social workers? You're using your resources inefficiently, you're wasting your budget. Think what you're doing.
Let me just slip into the chat room for a second. Uh, Ashiana, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly.
Yes.
Good to see you are preserving, you're persevering and are very much determined. Great story for people out there. You will definitely be an asset to our land, Diana. Keep up the great work. God bless. Ree, so proud of you. Keep up the good work. Laura F, good job. Have to meet you. Richard, what are most people surprised to learn about you when they get to know you?
Before I go, I just have to say, you asked me something earlier about, persons who actually helped me, and Ashiana is one of those persons who really helped me through my process, my growth and development,
Wow.
especially when I was in Colombia, when I had my hardship and times. She really was the rock right there for me, so I have to acknowledge that.
Again, it
So
takes a
thank you.
village.
Yes, it does. So thank you so much. Kind words. Yes. Sorry, I just.
Yeah, what are most people surprised? No, don't be sorry at all. Let's go with the flow.
Yeah.
What are most people surprised to learn about you when they get to know you? One thing.
How humble I am. I look at this and, like, when they look at me, I don't smile a lot. So they say you're a very serious person, you're so uptight. But when they get to know me, they're like, you're very humble.
Looking back, what would you change about your education, your experience, your travels? What would you change? Would you change anything?
So I would change nothing.
Yeah.
It made me who I am, where am I today, and it definitely have a long way to go with me.
When
And
are
I
you
would
most
not
happy?
change. What's that, sorry?
When are you most happy?
I'm most happy when I'm doing my job, when I'm helping people, when I'm on the ground. Like, one of the things that I've learned through my journey is I'm not a person who's going to sit in the office. I need to get out there with the people. I need to dwell with the people, be where the dust at their feet and where the sun rises and the horizon is. That's me. I'm more happy when I am with the people, changing the process, doing things that change the face of how people see themselves, giving them the opportunity, advocating for them. That is what I'm most happy.
What are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of my achievements so far, because this was a decade in the making.
If you could go back in time, what would you tell a 16-year-old Richard?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'll definitely tell him one thing: have faith, because a few times along my journey, I lost faith. And if it wasn't for those people who were around me at that point in time, my friend told me one thing, and it stuck with me throughout my life. People come into your life for a particular reason, for a particular time, for a particular purpose. Some go, some stay. Some is going to basically you never hear from again. Some are always going to be there. So that's what I would tell myself: have faith. Because if I knew about this, what I'm telling you now, I think the path that I actually chose a few times, I would have never actually chose it. But in all retrospect, it turned out well.
What are you most thankful for?
Family, friends, good support. Yeah.
You know, I want to ask you this question about suicide, even though time is upon us. What are some things you have learned about suicide and why people attempt to die, to kill themselves?
When you lose faith and when you lose hope, when you think that there's no answer, right? There's no there's no belief, or there's no life anymore left within you. There's no light. You tend to basically look for the easiest thing and the easiest way out. For me, listening to other people and sharing their experience, what I've learned is that they don't think that there's hope, or they don't think that things can really change or turn around, and they don't have anyone to talk to. They just basically go into this dark place and become lonely. That's depression. And when that takes you over, it's like you don't want to come out from it. You just basically want to end it.
And you have in your work seen the effects of that dark place on people.
A lot of times.
Mhm. In the chat room, Mario Singh said, convincing the corrupt politicians in Guyana to spend money on some of these issues is the bigger challenge, Richard, but great insight on your behalf. Ashiana said, thank you for the acknowledgement, Richard. Rich, what makes you laugh out loud?
Having good friends and good company around. I've always enjoyed that, and I think that is my relief from every single thing that I've stressed about and challenged about, like have challenged in my life. Just basically having friends who really know me and we just have a good time.
If you had your parents listening to you right now, they might be, what would you want to tell them?
Thank you for putting up with me, all my bad ways as a young kid, but believing in me and having faith in me, giving me the opportunity and sticking by me, telling me every single thing that I really need to know, telling me about my four parents and driving me to go beyond what the expectations were set, and just being there for me all through this way. I can't be more thankful than that.
Richard, thank you. And thanks to the listeners. This is Selvin Collins saying, thank you for tuning in. Fear not what fear whispers to you. Fear your obedience to it. Good night.
Good night.